Hi, I'm Languages, and welcome to Geography 101. Geography 101 is all about the places that I visited from Europe, Caribbean, North America, South America, Asia, and a lot more. And today, I have my special guest. He is the author of several books, no other than Mr. Dylan West.
Hey Daniel, how you doing?
I'm fabulous like you, Mr. Dylan, and thank you for your time.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been a few weeks since we last came on the podcast together.
Yes, and can you please introduce yourself?
Sure, I am Dylan West. Like Daniel said, I'm the author of a few books. I mainly write young adult sci-fi and fantasy that are Christian based. Scribes Descent and Emulsipation are the first two out the door, but I will have book two of the Scribe series next month. That'll be called Scribes Aflame. So be looking for that.
Oh, great. Can we talk about your upcoming book?
Okay, we can do that before we get into the geography stuff. Some exciting news with latest newsletter I sent out just a few days ago is that I did a cover reveal for book two. So
Oh,
I will
wow.
provide that for you after this, Daniel, so that you can pass that along to our listeners.
Definitely. So, how did you craft the Scribes the Flame book two?
So it takes place where book one leaves off. Um, and I don't want to get into too many specifics just because it would probably end up being a spoiler. Um,
Yes.
but the cover art looks pretty similar to book one's cover, except that it's red instead of black. And there are a few very noticeable graphic elements that have been added to the cover, and it'll be things that will make the reader say, "Hmm, how does this figure in?" And they'll have some fun looking for those images as they read.
Oh, interesting. So, what behind the title of Scribes, Descent Flame?
Oh, Scribes of Flame, book two.
Yes, good.
So, like the title suggests, the scribes are going to be going down to some volcanic areas. I
Okay.
probably shouldn't say too much more than that, just to avoid spoilers. But
Spoiler alert, people. But for sure, this is one of a kind of follow up for your Scribe Descent.
and if you haven't read book one, Scribes Descent, there is a free sample on my website. So dylanwestauthor.com. If you go there, the first four chapters are there for free. So you can go in and see if you like the writing style and see if the story grabs you.
Yes, definitely. So, Mr. Dylan, how would you describe your writing?
Um, well, a lot of other people say that they really enjoy the big world building. And I did spend 12 years working on that. So, I worked that long on the whole series, but particularly on Scribe's Descent, polishing it and getting it ready. Um, and instead of hiring an editor, I got hundreds of fellow authors to do critique swaps with. And a lot of people say that they like how clean my prose is. I work really hard to make every sentence easy to read and very clear. So those are the two
So,
things I would probably say for my writing: big world building, and I focus really heavy on the readability.
what is the process in making those clear sentences?
Okay, well, after I just hammer out the first draft, I go back and I start looking for things like making sure that there's no ambiguity. And what I mean is that each sentence has exactly one way the reader could interpret it. If I see that any sentence could be taken in two or more different ways, I start playing with the wording to make it so that there's only one possible interpretation. So I know that's a little hard to understand for me just saying it like that. I'd probably have to give you an example, and I don't have, I don't have any examples right off the top of my head. But I also look at things like how long is the sentence, and if a sentence is long, should I shorten it by breaking it up into multiple sentences, or do I just craft it so that even though it's long, it's still easy to read? Um, I'm of the persuasion that the longer a sentence is, the easier it is to confuse the reader. And you have to work harder to make a long sentence clear, generally. And I look at things like the subject of the sentence, whoever's doing the action, and the main verb of the sentence, what that actor is actually doing, how much stuff, how many words are packed between those two parts of the sentence. Generally speaking, you want the actor and the action to be as close as possible. Because if you dogpile like a 15-word long parenthetical, between those two things, by the time you get past that parenthetical clause, the reader, they read the main verb and they're like, wait, who actually did this verbing? And they have to go back and look at the beginning of the sentence and say, oh, it was that guy, right? So I look really hard at the sentence structure and ask myself, is my reader going to have to go backward to remember something at the beginning of the sentence? If the answer is yes, that's not acceptable for me. I'll rewrite and reword until that's no longer necessary.
So the talent comes naturally, or you need to learn it.
Well, it wasn't that natural at the beginning of my writing career, but over time, it has become natural. Not always on the first draft, but definitely on the second and third draft when I go back. Um, I look for that and I'm able to find it mostly because I've spent many, many years critiquing other authors and seeing those kinds of problems and having to help them fix them. And when I go back to my own work, it's easier to see in my own writing.
Interesting, Mr. Dylan. So before we go on to our Geography 101, can you please invite our listeners to buy your books?
Absolutely. And, in all fairness, what I want to do first is to invite them to just go to the website and try the sample. So, that way it's low pressure, right? I'm not really asking people to buy. I'm really asking people to try the sample. And if they like the sample, then buy the book, right?
Yes.
So if they go to DylanWestAuthor.com, and Dylan is spelled Dylan. So if you go to DylanWestAuthor.com, you will see a free sample of both my published books. That would be Scribes Descent, and that would be Emulsipation. So the first few chapters of each, right there on my website, read it. If you like it, then there is a link at the top and bottom of both pages that will take you directly to Amazon, where you can order it in a number of different formats: Kindle, paperback, hardcover. Actually, Emulsipation, there is no hardcover for that one. That one's just Kindle and soft paperback. But yeah, so give those samples a try. See if you like the writing style. See if the story clicks for you. And I actually have some other stories, some samples of other books I've written on my website, but I just haven't published those yet. But feel free to check those out too.
Yes, people, let's support Dylan West because the books are phenomenal. So before
Well, thanks.
yes, so before we go, Mr. Dylan, I want to shout out to the people listening. My top 6 countries listening to me according to Apple chart. In Canada, I got 55.4. In Finland, I got 194. Ireland at 82. Israel at 61.6, and
Ooh.
Netherlands 119.3, and last but not the least, Poland at 161. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower the world itself, the geography, the planet that we are living right now. So, Mr. Dylan, what will be our next stop for our journey? For your journey, sorry.
Okay, well, I would like to think of it as our journey as we talk about it, that people
Yes.
can kind of live vicariously through it in some fashion. So last time we were on this podcast, we were talking about the world tour that I did on the USS Carl Vinson as a sailor. Okay, we talked about all the ports and the bodies of water that I sailed through and all that, right? The only port that I didn't really talk in any detail about was Lisbon, Portugal. But there wasn't a whole lot to say about that port, anyways, except that I spoke a little bit of Portuguese there, and when I ran out of things to say in Portuguese, then I fell back on Spanish. you know,
Obrigada, obrigado.
because most of the people there they could understand Spanish, even if they maybe not weren't able to speak it. So that was my little hack for that port. But we talked about that tour, and if anybody's interested, please go back and watch that or listen to that podcast, and you can get all those details. But for this one, I wanted to talk about a missions trip that I did while I was in the Navy. This was while I was stationed on the USS Carl Vinson as a nuclear operator, but it was before we did that around the world tour. At the time, we were stationed in Bremerton, Washington, and we had been making trips back and forth between San Diego and Bremerton, doing our exercises in the Pacific. But when I was on leave, and I can't remember exactly what year it was, but I think it was like 2004. Either 2003 or 2004. One of those years. I became friends with a gentleman at my church who ran a missions agency. And he told me about a missionary couple that was about to fly over to Morocco and begin gearing up for their next missions trip. And he invited me to go along with them for I think it was about a week. So that I went, and to get there, I flew out to, I think it was 2 or 3 different ports in Spain first as a layover. I remember Malaga, Spain, and Madrid, Spain. And I didn't really go out into Spain. I just kind of stayed at the airport at that point. But then I flew across the Strait of Gibraltar and over to Melilla, Spain. That's spelled Melilla. So Melilla, that is a Spanish-owned city that is found inside of Morocco. So it is an exclave, right? When a city owned by a different country is totally surrounded by another country, we call that an exclave. And we don't have really any of those in the United States that I know of, but this is a somewhat common thing over in Asia and in Europe. This one happens to be in Africa. So there is a city called Melilla that it's technically part of Spain, but it's surrounded by Morocco. So that means that to drive out of the city, you have to go through customs and you have to bring your passport. So it is just like crossing any other country border. And I remember doing that and going out into what we called Morocco proper. And so the big difference is it's because Melilla was owned by Spain, Christianity was good, right? You could have Bibles, you could pray, you could go to church, and nobody bothered you about any of that. But as soon as you crossed the border to go into Morocco, it wasn't the same, right? It's an Islamic nation.
Yes.
So now I seem to remember it, at least back then, it wasn't like super fundamentalist like, say, Saudi Arabia or Iraq would be, right? It seems like the farther away you get from that area of the Middle East, they get a little about things. At least this was my impression. I don't know if because it was like 20 years ago since I've been there, right? That's a long time for things to change. But so when we went out there, it wasn't like I was worried that, somebody was going to hurt me or, anything like that. That said, this was a couple years after 9/11, right? So looking back at it now, I'm a little bit surprised the Navy let me go. So they did, because I guess we didn't really have any problems with Morocco, and to my knowledge, we still don't. But yeah, I remembered going with the missionary across the border into the rest of Morocco, where instead of speaking Spanish, suddenly everybody spoke Arabic. And at the time, I did not know very much Arabic other than Assalamu alaikum, which is, peace be upon you, or their way of saying hello, right?
Yes.
And I knew shukran. Shukran is thank you.
Thank you.
So that was about the extent of what I knew in Arabic at that time. Since then, I've studied a lot more. In fact, last week at my daughter's speech and debate tournament, I saw a Christian family from Egypt there, and I got to practice some of my Egyptian Arabic with them.
Yes.
I don't know like an extensive amount, but I had some basic conversation with them. But anyways, the dialect of Arabic spoken in the Maghreb, that's the Arabic word for Morocco. Their dialect of Arabic is pretty different from the one you would find over by Saudi Arabia in Iraq. There's actually a lot of different dialects, and their most common daily conversational words, those are the words that tend to be it's like when you start getting into academic stuff like legal, science, those kinds of words, that they all kind of start using modern standard Arabic, or what they call MSA, right?
Yes.
So even if I did know some basic Arabic at the time, I certainly didn't know any Moroccan dialect, and I actually still don't, because I've mostly focused on Egyptian Arabic, modern standard, and Levantine, which is like around Syria and Lebanon. But so back to the geography. We went out of Melilla into Morocco proper, and the reason was not really the Moroccans themselves. It was the Rif Berber people of the northeast corner of Morocco. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a lot of indigenous people that live in that area, and they're called the Rif Berbers. Some of them, well, actually, according to the article I read just recently, quite a few of them are bilingual in their native language and in Arabic. But there's a good number of them that only know their native language, and that the predominant language of that area is called Tamasikt. And that is probably a language you've never heard of. I know I had not heard of it until I went there. And there's not it's not one of those languages you're going to find a Rosetta Stone lesson for. It's not like Portuguese and Japanese and Spanish and all those, right? Because only, gosh, I haven't looked it up, but it's probably a pretty small number of people that speak it, compared to the big languages. And this is one of those languages where the people living in that area are not, at least back then, 20 years ago, they were not it was very rural. You didn't see a lot of technology there. And most of the people, I think most, didn't even read their own language. They only spoke and understood it, spoken. So the missionary I went with, he had Bibles that were translated into Tamasikt, and I remember we did hand some of them out, but only to the people who actually knew how to speak it. How to read it. For the rest of them, we had to give them an audio Bible. So now you're probably wondering, like, how do you give someone an audio Bible? right? If they don't
Yes.
have a laptop or they don't have an iPhone or any of that stuff, a lot of these people probably don't even have internet access. So like, how would you even give them an audio Bible? And they had like this little handheld device with a little speaker built in. And I don't remember all the details, but there were some buttons on there, and you'd press the buttons to start it playing, and it would like read aloud for you the Gospel of Matthew, in Tamasic.
Oh, wow.
Or some other portion of scripture. I don't remember if they had like the whole New Testament or just certain books, but they had somebody, I guess it was probably a Bible translator. It might have been somebody from Wycliffe who, had translated the Bible into Tamasic and then read it out loud. And this way you could hand these little devices to even the oldest, most remote Reef Berber people who probably didn't even have electricity at all, this battery powered device. And they could listen to the Bible spoken to them in their language.
Interesting.
Yeah. And these people, just to be clear about the setting, the Reef Berber people, it's kind of like, I feel like it's like a steppe kind of geography. Some light hills and open plains, big open skies, not like tons of trees and forests, kind of scattered, kind of that kind of atmosphere. And I remembered it being different than anywhere else that I'd ever been, any of my other ports or, any other places I traveled. And you really did need an SUV to go out onto some of that rugged terrain.
Yes, because it's like too far from civilization.
Yeah, and now we did stop by a few cities, some major cities where that would not be Reef Berbers, that would be Moroccans, and so Arabic was very much dominant there. But I remember meeting up, I think it was another missionary family in one of those cities, and they spoke only French. So there are some French speakers even within Morocco, not just missionaries, but other people too. So you have a fair sampling of people who speak Spanish, who came from Spain or live in Melilla. You have a good number of people who speak French, and the vast majority speak Arabic. And if you go out into the boonies, so to speak, then you would find people who speak Tamasic or some variant, some like dialect of it.
Wow, what a journey indeed, Mr. Dylan. So, to sum up, what is your best highlight of your journey?
Well, I don't know that this was my best highlight, but I will say that I did get to look across the border and see the into Algeria, because Algeria is situated to the east of Morocco. And so Melilla, Spain, that is in the northeast corner. We were only maybe about 100 kilometers from that border. So we drove out, and the missionary explained, I would take you over there, except we're not allowed. In fact, they didn't let any cars drive across the border. You had to fly over. And then you had to have like a visa to get in. So the best I could do was just kind of look over the border and see Algeria. And he told me it's kind of a dangerous place for foreigners anyways. So I was like, oh, okay. And I think I remembered there being like this guard shack and this brick wall with barbed wire on top or something. I don't know. It was 20 years ago, but I remembered it looking a little bit intimidating.
So if you go back to all the countries that you've been through, which country you're going to choose?
Man, it's, I honestly, I don't want to necessarily go back to one of the countries I've already been to. I really want to go to other countries I haven't been to yet.
Okay. You rather go explore another country?
Yeah, it's like probably India, because then I'd get to practice some of my Hindi in India, not just at like IKEA or airports.
Okay.
That's where I generally get my practice, with some of those languages.
So, namaste.
Yeah, namaste. Yep. I got to that's how I sold some books on my trip to California not last weekend, but the weekend before.
Mm.
When we were flying out to my daughter's debate tournament, we were flying Frontier Airlines, and there was a couple, an Indian couple sitting in front of me, and an Indian couple sitting behind me. They were from different Pradeshes or provinces of India. I can just tell by looking at their skin, that they probably were Indian. And so my opening sentence to them was "Kya aap Hindustani hai?" And they were like, "You just spoke Hindi?" And they would say, "Well, actually, I do understand Hindi, but really I speak Malayalam," which was make sure I don't get it wrong. I think Malayalam is the regional language for Kerala, and then one of the other ones spoke Tamil, which is the regional language for Tamil Nadu. So one couple, the one in front of me, they were from Tamil Nadu. The ones behind me were from Kerala. And those are both on the southern peninsula. You know how India kind of forms like this Dorito shape pointing down into the Indian Ocean?
Yes.
Right? So if you go to the bottom of that peninsula, one is on one side and one is on the other. So yeah, and I got to talk to them a little bit about their provinces, their pradeshes too, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, you actually know where these places are." So they had one of those couples ended up buying my book, Scribes Descent.
Nice. What
So
a good
the upshot
salesman.
of this is not only does learning a language and learning some geography let you really connect with people in a way that makes them feel loved and makes them feel seen, but you might actually sell some books too.
The triple purpose, as they said. So let's talk about your countries that you want to visit. And you said India. Let's do 4 more countries that you want to visit.
4 more. Okay, so let me think about this. Japan, of course. And one of the kind of wacky places I would like to see in Japan is the island of cats.
Oh, wow.
Have you heard about that?
No.
I
What's this all
forget the
about?
name. Yeah, I forgot the name of the island. I could Google it. But there is an island that supposedly has like hundreds and hundreds of cats that are wild.
Oh.
They just kind of roam around. I guess they just forage and find stuff to eat. I don't know. But I think there's like YouTube videos. You can go and search for it. I mean, I think there's like little mini documentaries that people have made for this place. So
It's interesting to
yeah.
visit. Cats.
And one of the major cities in Japan, I think it was Osaka. I don't think it was Tokyo. I think it was Osaka. That city where I think the Nintendo development team who created Zelda Breath of the Wild for the Switch and the
Yes.
Wii U,
Yes.
they modeled the world map for that game to the same scale. Somebody else, one of your fans who's a big Zelda,
Zelda, the legend.
big Zelda fan, they're going to be like, no, it was this other city. But, one of those major cities. And so I would like to go visit that city and like print out a map of Breath of the Wild's overworld and just kind of be like, all right, where's this? I can map like the landmarks in the game to places in the city. Like the Shrine of Resurrection. Oh, it's like this
It's in
subway terminal or something. Yeah.
the center of the train.
Yeah. I would like to see Japan. You said 4 countries, right?
Yes.
Or 4 others. So India, so 5 total. India, Japan. I would like to go to Israel. And for the obvious reason, right? I'm a Christian and I would like to see some of these sites, or at least what the touristy people claim are the sites, right? I'm sure they would take me to the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus prayed, which, I'm sure that would be easy enough to find, but then some dude would say like, hey, this spot right here next to this tree was where he prayed blood. And then of course I'd be like, wait, how do you know it was that exact spot? But it would be fun to go there. So Israel would be another. Let's see what else. I would like to go to the Philippines just because I have a lot of Filipino friends, but also because there is a very weird geographic feature on the island of Luzon. I don't
Yes.
know if you've heard of this, but the northern island of Luzon, where the capital city of Manila lies, somewhere on that island there is a lake. And in that lake, there is an island.
Yes.
And on that island is a lake. And
Yes.
in that lake is another island. Isn't that wild? It's got like triple nested islands, like an island inside of an island inside of an island. Exactly one other place on planet Earth that people, or at least the internet, knows about that's like that. And that's one of the islands in northern Canada. And it was discovered, if I'm not mistaken, by Brian, I think his name is or Ken Jennings. He was one of the prior Jeopardy champions. One of the first guy who like kept winning a lot and made several $1,000,000 being a Jeopardy contestant. I think I read somewhere that for fun, he would go on Google Earth and just kind of look around in different places for weird geographical features. And he found that triple nested island lake thing in northern Canada.
Oh, wow.
That it's not even like labeled on maps, because if you tried to, I guess you probably couldn't label every single little island in northern Canada. Have you ever really looked at a map of that? It's crazy, right?
Yes.
So
Especially if winter is all covered with snow.
yeah, so there's kind of different trains of thought when it comes to what countries you want to go to. For some people, it's like, where are the beautiful touristy places, right? With the tropical water and those kinds of things. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That appeals to a big segment of society. But then you got nerds like me and science nerds. So, and nerds come in all flavors, right? But the science nerds will be like, hey, there's this Lake Baikal over in I guess it's Russia, or Mongolia. Boy, I'm gonna have to look at my map now. It's gonna drive me crazy. No, it's in Russia. It's above Mongolia. Lake Baikal. It's, I think, the deepest lake in the world, and it's got species of fish that live nowhere else. Right. So, like, science nerds like me, I'd be attracted to places like that have these physical phenomenon that are really weird that you can't find anywhere else. Like the Garapogazko Lagoon that forms a little dot beside the Caspian Sea. So if you look at a map of Asia, above Iran, there's the Caspian Sea almost looks like a backwards question mark with no dot under it. Except that the dot is kind of to the right-hand side of the question mark. It's kind of weird. And that dot, that it looks like a lake that's beside the Caspian Sea, but that little dot is, if I'm not mistaken, is either dry or like all year long, or dry some of the year. And it's like this vast, I mean, like, I think it's several hundred kilometers wide, dry lake you could just walk across. It's really weird. So that's another, like, kind of a specialty area I'd like to see in person. But yeah, so you have people who want to go to touristy places, people who want to see interesting scientific things. You have the people who want to go to historical landmarks, right? I'm not as much of a history buff as I am like a science guy. But countries, I'm wandering from your question. Japan, Israel, Philippines.
You said Canada.
Well, I mean, I could see that triple nested lake island thing either in Canada or in the Philippines, right?
Yes.
Well, there's a place I would like to go, but I'm a little bit chicken to do it. Do you want to hear about that place?
Oh, yes. Where is
um,
that?
I would probably want to go to the Amazon, someplace in the Amazon, just to see it in person, especially because I write about rainforests in some of my books.
Yes.
So to actually be there in person would give me a lot of sensory detail that I could make my writing even more immersive because I'd actually been in a jungle, right?
Yes.
But that scares the stuffing out of me because all the things that can kill you that are hiding in that jungle. I mean, gosh, many of,
Anaconda.
many of which are microscopic. You know,
Yes.
if I could
So,
suit myself up in a little bubble and go in there, with surrounded by bodyguards with automatic weapons, I don't know, maybe that I would be kind of brave enough to do it.
so Brazil will be your number five?
Probably so, but like with a huge asterisk of, I would have to hear the audible voice of God from a burning bush, thou shalt go there. And I'd be like, okay, safety isn't a place. I mean, safety isn't a person, not a place. That was one of the main morals of Scribes' Descent. So I'd be telling myself that. I'd be quoting my own book to myself.
So being curious, it really helped you in writing your
Yeah.
Scribes
Scribe
series.
theories, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
yeah, definitely. When you're designing a universe from scratch, at least I found it helpful mostly to focus on planets, one planet at a time, where the bulk of the story will take place. So when you're designing a planet from scratch, it is extremely helpful to know how our own planet works, down to a pretty intimate degree, so that you can write that planet convincingly that you design, right? So you kind of know, if you design a continent that has almost no little jagged edges to it, it's all really flat and smooth, you kind of know what the ramifications of that kind of design are. Then you get a continent like Africa, where it doesn't have very many safe harbors. And so shipping is going to be uh, underpowered there. Versus if you get a continent like Europe, right? If you, for our listeners, if you pop open a map of the world and you look at these coastlines, you'll see what I'm talking about. If you look at Africa, it's pretty smooth, the outline of the continent. You don't have too many parts that divot in like the teeth of a key, right? But when you look at Europe, all the jagged edges, all the inlets and gulfs, and all of that going on, their channels and all that stuff. There's so much more coastline. It's all very complicated, and that really helps with safer navigation and safer harbors for your shipping. And so, knowing these things really helps to make your world building real. And the only way you can get to that level of detail is just being super curious. I watch a lot of YouTube videos about geography, and usually they go like this. The here's why the geography of Iraq is really poor, and I'm like, oh, really? I would think it would be good because it's bordering the Persian Gulf. But it turns out very little of Iraq actually borders the Persian Gulf. Really, more of Kuwait, Iran, and Saudi Arabia border it. And Iraq only gets this tiny little sliver. And that tiny little sliver is really inaccessible to the country because I think it's like marshlands or something. I'd have to go back and read it. So it turns out that just because a country has like some coastline doesn't mean that it's necessarily usable coastline. Like with Africa, there are rivers that go from the center of the continent over to the ocean, but many of them have to go down very deep cataracts or waterfalls. And that's a problem for your shipping, your container ships. They cannot sail up or down a steep waterfall.
Yes.
So that really hurts Africa economically, like in ways that most people just have not been taught in schools.
Yes,
So
definitely.
the curiosity really drives me to consider all these design factors so that when I'm designing a planet, if I want a continent to be poor, I know how to shape it and make its geography so that they are destined to be poor. And I know how to shape a continent to make it more likely to be rich and powerful.
Very well said, Mr. Dylan. So before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my new podcast, Comedy 101, with Mr. Mike Lucas. And our first episode is today. Will publish 9 p.m. Pacific time. Please do listen. Comedy 101, because Comedy 101 is to empower comedian all over the world. We learn how to love people because laughter is the best medicine. Right,
Ooh.
Mr. Dylan?
Oh, it is powerful medicine indeed. And
Can you please invite our listeners to buy all your books again?
absolutely. So if you go to the website, dylanwestauthor.com, you will find a free sample of Scribes Descent and Emulsipation. And just to clarify, Emulsipation is a novella that is the TV show that characters in the Scribes series quote from. So because Scribes takes place in a totally different universe, they don't know what Marvel is or Star Wars or Disney. They don't know any of those things. They don't have our culture. I have to write their culture for them, right? So one of their cult classic TV shows is Emulsipation. And that's where, if you're wondering about the word, where moles help rescue or emancipate human slaves, which sounds rather odd, but when you read it, you'll see why. It'll make pretty good sense. At least I think it makes sense. But yeah, so Scribes Descent and Emulsipation, check them out, try the sample. And then the other thing is, if you leave a review for Scribes Descent, I will put your name into the video game Scribes Descent. That's right. I didn't just write it as a book. I made it as a video game, which you can play on my website. So if you go to dylanwestauthor.com, on a laptop or a desktop computer, you can play it with keyboard and mouse or a USB controller. So you'll see the names of people who left reviews for my book. You'll see those names already in the video game. So I would like to see your name be the next one in the game.
Yes, people, let's support and play the game of Mr. Dylan West.
Absolutely. And sign up for the newsletter on my website. That's important. That way you get all the geekiest science research tidbits that go into the making of the books.
Mr. Dylan, what is your advice for those people out there who want to explore the world?
Oh, yeah, geography. Well, get rich. or, or if you don't want to get rich, join the Navy. That's what I did, right? And I went around the world, went to different ports. Actually, so like in the United States Navy, you've got the surface fleet and you got the submariner fleet, right? So you're going to a surface ship like a carrier, or a cruise ship or one of those, a destroyer, or you're going to a submarine. I'm told, I've never really been on deployment on a sub, but I'm told that surface ships tend to hit more ports than submarines do. So if you're really interested in hitting lots of ports, you probably want to get stationed on something like an aircraft carrier. And then you're getting paid to go, right? You're
Yes.
getting paid to go out to sea and to go to these ports. The only thing is the vast majority of your deployment is not frolicking at ports. It's really at sea, right? On a 6-month deployment, you might go to somewhere between, 5 and 10 ports if you're lucky, somewhere in that time period, that number. And each port you might stop for like 3 or 4 days, right? So out of 180 days, you might spend 20 to 30 days total in ports, right? So joining the Navy is a good way to do it. Maybe working for an airline The only thing there is you probably only get very short trips, the kind of traveling you want to do. I hear that like journalists have to do a lot of travel if they're like international correspondents.
Yes,
Yeah, so like
definitely.
finding a job, a vocational way to go overseas is probably the most affordable way to do it, and then you're getting paid, as part of your job. Otherwise, you probably have to get rich, or you're
Yes.
like a single like a bachelor and you're backpacking through Europe or something. If you have like a wife and a lot of kids, it would probably be a lot harder for you to pull it
Yes.
off if you're not wealthy.
Yes, people, we are encouraging you to travel the world, different countries in our planet. As a human being, we need to explore our own planet.
Cheaper ways to do it if you really can't leave your house to do it. You could watch a lot of what do you call it, vlogs, where different YouTubers go out and tour these different countries, and you can watch their adventures in those places, especially if it's a particularly dangerous place or
Oh,
very hard to reach place. So
yes.
at least you can watch and experience it that way, or cruise or take a cruise through Google Earth. Like I was talking about earlier, how Ken Jennings found that triple nested island lake thing in northern Canada. You can download Google Earth or go to their app or whatever and just explore the world by cruising across this virtual globe and zooming in on points of interest. I spent quite a bit of time doing that. It's pretty fun.
Yes, people. And thank you for your time, Mr. Dylan.
Well, thank you, Daniel.
Welcome, people. See you soon.
All right. Bye, guys.